Thank you all for being here this morning. It really is a pleasure. This is my first visit and time in Amarillo. And driving in today, I realized just how flat it actually is. So that was a bit jarring, but it seems like a nice place. I did not have the 72-ounce steak last night. Did not try that. Has anyone actually tried it in the room? I'm curious. No one has a death wish. Genuinely, if anyone has a story about the steak, I'd love to hear it afterwards. I'm Daniel Bennett. I am an associate professor of political science at John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. JBU is an intentionally Christian institution of higher education. We are affiliated with the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. We are an interdenominational university. They use that label very consciously to say that they welcome Christians on faculty and staff from a variety of doctrines and theological backgrounds. We do hold to a general statement of faith from the National Association of Evangelicals, along with most other CCCU institutions. Our students are not necessarily Christians. I would probably say 80% to 90% of our students come from some Christian background. But there's plenty of students there, and probably more in the last few years, who don't subscribe to a faith background. Maybe they grew up culturally Christian, or maybe they did grow up in strong Christian households and for whatever reason have started to stray. And so it's an interesting environment to teach, particularly when we're talking about political science. And I want to begin my talk today on misinformation, conspiracy theories, and partisan polarizations with an observation from the fall of 2020. It was about a week or two after the results of the 2020 election had been called. And I had a student in my class. He was a first-year student, didn't know him that well, but he said, I'd love to talk about the results of this election in class because I have some questions. I said, that sounds fine. I try not to do as a political scientist, I try not to talk too much about current events in class unless they illustrate what we're actually talking about in class. Try to stay to the syllabus. It's sometimes more difficult than other times. But this particular day, we talked about the results of the election, and he specifically was convinced that what we were seeing reported in the news was not what had happened in the election. And as evidence, he cited, I imagine many of you have seen this or heard about it from others, maybe in your congregations, maybe in your family, suspicious vote drops during the evening of the election. Well, the votes were being reported in this way, but then all of a sudden around 11 or 12 o'clock, we saw spikes for votes for Joe Biden. And all of a sudden, hold on a second, Donald Trump was winning around 8 or 9 p.m. And then all of a sudden, when I woke up in the morning, it switched. What happened, right? This is evidence of malfeasance or a malevolent action taking place. And so in the class, we talked a little bit about, the process of counting votes. In fact, observers had been saying for weeks and months, given the fact that there was going to be more early voting taking place in this election than really in any election in American history, it was going to take time to count votes that were coming in early. And by and large, those votes that were coming in for early votes were more likely to favor the Biden campaign more than the Trump campaign for a variety of reasons. One of which was saying, Donald Trump was saying, basically encouraging his voters, don't early vote, right? Vote on the day of the election because they're trying to steal this from us somehow. It didn't really matter what evidence we brought up, though, because regardless of what was said, it was taken as evidence of, well, this is just part of the conspiracy. Right, all of these explanations are just part of the conspiracy. Try to say, well, look, if you look at polling and surveys before the election, we saw, Joe Biden with a pretty steady lead throughout the campaign. Compared to 2016, he was a much less controversial candidate than in 2016 than Hillary Clinton was. He was pretty boring as a candidate, right? And so what was the likelier explanation? Is it that it was some concerted effort across states, including states with full Republican control of these electoral mechanisms, to deny Donald Trump a second term in office? Or was it that this less controversial, boring candidate beat out a very controversial candidate overseeing perhaps the greatest public health crisis in American history, and reaping the economic damages that came with that, right? That's a pretty simple explanation when you actually step back and look, but for this particular student, there was more to it than that. And so all that is by way of saying, when we talk about misinformation and conspiracy theories, it's not that we are looking to be misled, right? Certainly you don't wake up one day and say, I am excited about the prospect of being misled when I approach the world. We want certain things to be true, right? We're hoping that certain things are true about the world. And a lot of times if the reality is not lining up with those hopes or those desires, we often turn to information sources and explanations that help us grapple with the reality in which is exposed or presented to us. So, some questions, and these are in the outline. I apologize for the size of the text here. I imagine we can send these out to folks if y'all are wanting this. But have conspiracy theories and misinformation found their way into the congregations or organizations where you find yourself on a regular basis? If so, how have they done so? I'm curious to hear about that later. And if not, why do you think they haven't? Even at my university, right? They're kind of bubbling under the surface in certain pockets of students, faculty, staff too. And then finally, maybe this was the more important question, and getting back to what Carmen was talking about earlier, how do you minister to church members who have become enraptured by demonstrably false beliefs or false teachings or different realities? So we'll come back to that term here in a second. So let's define our terms. As a professor, we'll make sure we're talking about the same kind of definitions here. Misinformation can be described as unintentionally false information. So perhaps misinformation isn't necessarily spread or stated with the intent to deceive. It's something that is false, but it's not intentionally false. And this makes it different from disinformation, which is a concerted effort to spread malicious or harmful information for destructive purposes. So a lot of the stuff that we see on social media or reported in the news on a regular basis is not traditional disinformation. It hasn't been created with the express purpose of spreading because the person spreading it knows it's false. Sometimes we see that. But for the more prominent misinformation or conspiracy theories out there, I should say, a lot of this is just misinformation. It's unintentionally false information that's spread for a variety of reasons. Misinformation is often the target of fact checkers, trying to clarify certain things that we see in the news. This video was edited, or this video was taken out of context, and if you look at the entire context of the video, this is actually what happened. Those are traditional fact checkers that do these things. The thing about misinformation is it's often difficult to evaluate. There might be some, and as we'll talk more about conspiracy theories here in a second, there might be some truth to the claim or the evidence in misinformation, but it's perhaps, like I said a moment ago, taken out of context. Perhaps it's being stated in a way that's not entirely consistent with its original purpose. Perhaps it's just being misinterpreted in some way. And this is where we might get the term alternative facts. And so maybe we can take things that are demonstrably or certainly true, but then present it in a way that is not consistent with its original meaning or purpose. Going back to the 2016 election, there was a conversation between a journalist and Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House from Georgia, at the Republican National Convention. And if you remember 2016, one of Donald Trump's big campaign themes was crime and the fact that America is not safe and that his policies would make America safe. And the journalist asked Speaker Gingrich, Well, how does your party reckon with the fact that crime nationally, and violent crime specifically, has gone down at the national level in the aggregate? And you can look at crime statistics, and it has gone down from its peak in like the 80s, and it's just steadily decreasing. And he said, well, if you look at major cities, it's increased in certain places. She said, well, sure, but that's not everywhere, right? And so nationally, we still see this going down. His response was really interesting. His response was, yeah, but people believe it's going up. And that's actually what's more important. And he said that, right? People believe this. And it was a really insightful comment, and I don't think he was being malicious about it. He's saying, look, we can capitalize on these beliefs that people have. And honestly, I think he said something to the effect of, given that people believe it, I'd rather campaign on that than hard facts, right? It's harder to change people's hearts necessarily when you have this gut reaction here. And this brings us, of course, to confirmation bias. Misinformation is often sought out to confirm what we believe to be true already. When we see a headline or when we see a news story that supports our prior assumptions about the way the world works or ought to work, we are more likely to believe that because it makes us feel comfortable. This is a very normal psychological process. We don't seek out information or follow people on social media or read articles that are constantly challenging our prior assumptions, especially our deepest held assumptions. That's just not comfortable. I always ask my students, do you tend to hang out with people that agree with you on things, or do you tend to hang out with people who are constantly berating you and constantly pushing back against your beliefs? Some of us do this. Some of us have diverse friend groups. That's not what I'm talking about. We seek out information that supports what we believe. And oftentimes this allows misinformation to spread more rapidly when it essentially confirms what we believe about the way the world ought to work. Let's talk conspiracy theories for a moment and how this might differ from misinformation. So the book in front of you is by Rob Brotherton, a psychologist. He writes very accessibly about this topic of conspiracy theories. He has a pretty good definition of what a conspiracy theory is. Conspiracy theory assumes nothing is as it seems. There is something else behind the scenes that is the better explanation for the way the world works. Yeah, okay, this is the official narrative, but man, if you go deeper, that's where the explanation really lies. You get the official narrative from the government or from the media, but once you peel the curtain back a bit, that's where you really see who's pulling the levers. Conspiracy theories tend to portray conspirators as exceptionally competent. Oftentimes when we talk about conspiracy theories, you might try to, cast the villains as, well, at least in our previous, maybe even now, right? Joe Biden, for example, is often cast as kind of this bumbling, oafish, great uncle. I don't know what we want to characterize him as. But conspiracy theories actually suggest that there is much more sinister, malevolent competence behind these movements. And the reason is they're able to hide their true purposes because of their exceptional competencies, right? If they were really just dumb, they wouldn't be able to pull the wool over people's eyes so easily. And so conspiracy theories assumes that people are exceptionally competent behind the scenes. Conspiracy theories are also founded and make their living really on anomaly hunting, pointing to anomalies or outliers to explain how the world is actually working. So they might look, for example, to say, well, look, there was some evidence that someone actually did vote a couple of times in this one state. And so that's evidence of, massive voter fraud. That's a leap, right? But nevertheless, those anomalies are often used to support conspiracy theories. And then lastly, conspiracy theories aren't all dangerous. Okay, I'm a Portland Trail Blazers fan of professional basketball. It's much more comforting for me to believe that the NBA is just structurally biased against small market professional sports teams. That's more comforting to me to believe this conspiracy theory rather than the Blazers just have terrible luck, mismanagement, can't finish games or seasons well. There's something else going on, clearly, right? The system's rigged, is what I'm trying to say here. Even stuff with more real-world implications, right? Whether it's the belief that the government's covering up aliens' existence in Roswell or Area 51, or even something like the Kennedy assassination, right? I mean, something that 60 years ago was really hurtful to the country, right? It was really this psychologically damaging thing. Now we treat conspiracy beliefs about the Kennedy assassination almost as kind of a curiosity. Right? I imagine most of you know people who believe that there is something sinister with the Kennedy assassination. Some of us probably do believe that, right? Maybe, well, okay, official narrative, sure, but it's probably the mob. It was probably the CIA. Is that super harmful to talk about today? I don't know. I don't see a lot of people radicalized about the Kennedy assassination right now. Now, some can be dangerous, as we've seen, and I'm sure we all have seen in different contexts. So I found this chart to be especially interesting and helpful. It's available, again, in the slides. You can look it up on social media if you just look for conspiracy chart from Abby Richards. She has a really interesting pyramid of sorts here to explain the different kinds of conspiracy theories. So there are some, for example, that are relatively grounded in reality of some sort. So whether it's the existence of MK Ultra and the CIA, like super secret spy programs or something that turned out to have a kernel of truth in them, these are generally harmless things. But as we go up the pyramid, these things start to get more and more dangerous until we become completely detached from reality. And she believes that, and I think this is a really cool way to think about it, once you pass a certain threshold, you become more open to other types of conspiracy theories. And so once you start to open the door to some, it becomes more palatable to consider others. So if you do believe or you do know people who have entertained certain conspiracy theories, odds are that they're more open to entertaining others as well. It's not necessarily that people say, well, I believe the earth is flat and nothing, and that's where I'm drawing my line though. Nothing about this other stuff makes sense, right? There's gonna be a correlation between the flat earth people, maybe people who believe in the existence of this deep state conspiracy to promote this cabal of human trafficking at elite levels. Like they're all it's all connected at a certain point once you become more detached from reality. And again, some conspiracy theories are generally harmless, others become much more dangerous, to the point where we had, back in 2016, if you remember this, somebody showing up to a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. and opening fire in the pizza parlor because he was convinced that in the basement of this pizza parlor were children being prepared to be trafficked. This was the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. And I'm not going to explain it, but y'all can look it up if you're not familiar with it. There was no basement at the pizza parlor. There's no basement. But he was convinced. He was a father of, I think, 2 or 3 kids from North Carolina who drove up with a gun and opened fire, didn't hurt anybody, but he served a few years in prison as a result of these things. So some of these things can obviously be dangerous. I'm not going to spend too much time on this just because it's so small here, but YouGov, if you're looking for some resources here, YouGov does some good polling on these questions. And then breaks it up by who believes these types of questions. So for example, Americans who say they think that top Democrats are involved in elite child sex trafficking rings. This is at the crux of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Obviously, people who are favorable towards QAnon are much more likely to believe that than others. People who identify as very conservative are more likely to believe that statement. Interesting, 36% of Protestants are likely to believe that. And people who say that Joe Biden did not legitimately win the election, for example, about half of those are likely to say that they think these things are true. And we can go on here too. Beliefs that vaccines cause autism, for example. People who have a generally favorable view of QAnon tend to believe that vaccines cause autism. And then finally, Americans who say they think that regardless of who is officially in charge, a single group of people secretly control events and rule the world together. 3/4 of people who have a favorable view of QAnon believe this to be true. 43% of Protestants believe this to be true. And then 50% of born-again or evangelical Christians believe this to be true as well. So let's talk about some of the partisan attachments to this. We've been, in the last few years, I think, picking on Republicans for their belief in conspiracy theories. The fact is, though, that Republicans and Democrats have shown attachment to misinformation and conspiracy theories in the past. And the reason is we're more likely to engage ideas that are supportive of our prior beliefs, right? This goes back to the confirmation bias phenomenon. If we go back to 2004, for example, following the re-election of President Bush, there was a current of belief back then that, well, Ohio, which proved to be a tipping point state in some respects, there was maybe concerns about the machines being hacked to switch votes from John Kerry to George W. Bush. Was there any evidence of this? No. But, you know, there was maybe some shady relationships between the contractors who provided the machines and maybe someone who served on the Republican National Committee somewhere, and this took root among some who identified as Democrats. In 2008, and we could talk a lot about the different conspiracy theories about President Obama, right? He's not even an American. He's a plant. He's a Manchurian candidate set to destroy America. Okay. 2012, same kind of thing. And then in 2016, too, how in the world could Hillary Clinton lose to a guy like Donald Trump? It's not that maybe Donald Trump's message, and I'm showing my cards here, a little bit destructive as it might have been, didn't appeal to a large swath of the population that previously felt alienated from government and politics. It couldn't have been that. Rather, there had to be something else here, right? And it's not just that Russians were maybe trying to sow discord on social media. We know that was true. But Russians actually hacked voting machines. They changed votes in certain places. And we'll see this here. This was a poll taken after the 2016 election, right after the election, from December of 2016, from YouGov. Asked the question, do you think the following statement is true? Russia tampered with vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected president. This isn't the same thing as sowing false information on social media, literally tampering with vote tallies. Not surprisingly, 92% of people who voted for Donald Trump said, no way, that's obviously not true. 50% of people who voted for Hillary Clinton said, yeah, that's probably true. 50%! There's no evidence of this. They also asked after this election, were millions of illegal votes cast in the election? Not a couple, but millions of illegal votes. 3/4 of Hillary Clinton's voters said no. 6 in 10 of Donald Trump's voters said, yeah, that's probably what happened. Again, no evidence of this. Sure. A few instances of people trying to vote twice. Millions of illegal votes, no evidence that that happened. And yet, huge partisan differences on these questions. You see partisan differences in beliefs and conspiracy theories in more recent things. Did Donald Trump fake having COVID? I don't know what the conspiracy would be exactly with that. A good percentage of Democrats said, yeah, he faked it. He didn't actually have COVID. Maybe he had a stroke instead, and they were trying to cover it up. We haven't seen all his medical records. What's he hiding? Very few Republicans actually believe that. 46% of Democrats believe Donald Trump cut Social Security. And so I don't even know what that means, cutting Social Security. The checks, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. Just 6% of Republicans thought that. But then we see the other thing here, the divide on right-leaning conspiracy theories. 8 in 10 Republicans believe Joe Biden's mentally impaired in some way, suffering from dementia. The vote machines were rigged in 2020. 76% of Republicans from this survey from Indiana University. 76% said yes, the voting machines were rigged in 2020. 54%, yeah, the COVID's not actually a thing. It was used to manipulate the results of the election, shut down the country, gain control, etc. Kind of a fun one under the radar here. 38% of Republicans believe that Kamala Harris is not a citizen of the United States. I'm not sure about that one. In any event, there are partisan attachments to this, and it affects everybody. The point is that we tend to view the world through the lens more and more through the lens of our partisanship, through the lens of our political identity. And when we do that, we seek information that validates that identity or helps justify that identity. Political scientists and social scientists have for years been talking about the rise of affective polarization, that we're seeing others in an increasingly hostile way, particularly based on partisanship and ideology. We'll talk more about that here in a bit. Okay, but what about the religious attachments to conspiracy theories and misinformation? Well, not surprisingly, religious individuals of all kinds are susceptible. It's not just evangelical Christians, although they're in the news a lot lately. It's not just evangelicals. As religion becomes more politically polarized, and we are seeing this, right? Increasingly polarized churches. The trends here mirror those in the political realm. So we do see some differences among religious traditions. So, for example, white evangelical Republicans, and this is from the Survey Center on American Life from the American Enterprise Institute. White evangelical Republicans are more likely to believe in certain conspiracies. 74% of white evangelical Republicans believe there was voter fraud in the 2020 election, widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. 54% of non-evangelical Republicans believe this. 74% of white evangelical Republicans believed it. 67% of white evangelical Republicans held that there is a deep state working in Washington, D.C. to undermine the Trump administration in some way. 52% of non-evangelical Republicans believe it, but it's more prominent among white evangelical Republicans. But you see the support for conspiracy theories across different aspects of Christianity and other traditions. So for QAnon specifically, different tenets of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Is everybody familiar with this, at least in passing? Thank you. Everybody familiar with this, at least in passing? Central tenets are that the government, the media, financial sectors are all controlled by a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles. 15% of Americans believe that across the board. 25% of white evangelical Protestants, 26% of Hispanic Protestants, and 18% of Mormons. Okay, and you can see the other tenets here as well of QAnon. So all Americans, just 14% of Americans across the spectrum are what we would call QAnon believers, people who adhere to every aspect of the QAnon conspiracy theory. QAnon doubters, or maybe some who deny most of it, but maybe entertain some aspects. Among the QAnon believers, they find their biggest support among white evangelical Protestants, but just barely over Hispanic Protestants, just barely over Mormons. Really, the only tradition that almost exclusively rejects QAnon is Jews, not surprisingly, considering that Jews don't fare too well in QAnon, as maybe the driving force of these kinds of things. Even Black Protestants, right? 13% of Black Protestants would identify as QAnon believers across the board. So it's not just white evangelicals that are drawn to conspiracy theories. We're not just slamming white evangelicals or Republicans. This is a thing that's troubling across the board. And so last year, I decided to try to, and based on the observation I had with that student who was convinced that the election had been stolen in some capacity, I was curious to see the extent to which that view was pervasive, not just in my university, but across universities in the CCCU, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. And so I sent out a very non-scientific survey, really. Had 139 responses. It's not great, but still, it gives you an idea a little bit. It actually seemed to be pretty representative of the CCCU, or at least of my university. 59% female response rate. Christian higher ed tends to be more female than male. 53% identified as a Republican, 29% identified as Democratic. That's pretty consistent, mostly conservative. Interestingly, I asked vaccination status too. 73% reported being fully vaccinated. I thought that was a curious thing in Christian higher ed, because that's not the case at my university. I think the student vaccination rate at JBU for COVID vaccine was maybe like 40%. We can get into that why later. But I asked them some questions that were related to some of the conspiracy theories that we've been talking about this morning. I asked them, for example, just straight up, how much do you agree with or support QAnon? Straight up asked, okay? 40% said they don't agree. Just 2% said they agreed. a lot of people didn't know anything about it. They weren't familiar enough to to have a consistent view on these things. But then I decided to actually ask elements about the QAnon conspiracy theory and see if there were differences in support here. So one of the things, and this isn't exactly related, some of these questions aren't related exactly to QAnon, but they're at least related and tangentially. So the first question here, as president, Donald Trump was working to expose a network of elites involved in kidnapping, trafficking, and abusing children. That's certainly similar to the QAnon conspiracy theory. A little over 20% of the students in the survey responded and said, yeah, I agree with that. That's a pretty central tenet of QAnon. So they say that they don't agree with QAnon, but a lot more actually adhere to this particular belief. Less than 50% disagree with that, while a lot were unsure. Similarly, I asked, Joe Biden may appear to be president, but somebody else is actually in charge. A lot of folks agreed with this. More than 30% of the respondents said, yeah, this is probably true. And this isn't necessarily related to QAnon, because we could always say, there's someone else pulling the strings, but that is kind of a conspiratorial belief system. I had someone kind of dunk on this on social media and say, well, they were probably thinking about, the bureaucracy or the federal government. It's like, no. They're not that sophisticated. The average American is not sophisticated to draw those distinctions. It's much easier to just go with the simple explanation here. Somebody else is really in charge behind the scenes. I asked about the January 6th attack on the Capitol. If it was overblown by the media, used to unfairly portray peaceful supporters of Donald Trump as enemies of democracy, roughly 30% of the students said, yeah, that's accurate. A little over 50% said that, no, that's not accurate. And lastly, I asked, the coronavirus pandemic was exaggerated by elected officials and the media to harm the Trump presidency. Nearly 40% of the respondents said, yeah, that's probably or definitely true. Interestingly, this one wasn't particularly prominent. I went back to the 2016 election just to ask a conspiracy theory that was more prominent among Democrats. Russian hackers altered vote totals in certain areas to help Donald Trump win the election in 2016. Most people rejected this. I don't know how much of that is a function of not being a lot of strong partisan Democrats in the sample, but still, even those who identified as Democrat were more likely to reject this. So this brings us back to what do we do with this? This is really the million-dollar question, right? Why do we care about this so much? Why are conspiracy theories and misinformation problematic for our system of government and politics first? We'll talk about churches here in a second. Well, as a political scientist, I'm convinced that our system of government depends on people drawing from the same well of reality. When we evaluate our elected officials through elections, it's helpful to know that we are all evaluating them based on similar criteria. In fact, our system doesn't really work if we are evaluating candidates on false information. That's not a great way to make decisions when we are drawing from false information to make our decisions, not just on government evaluations and elections, but really on anything. Also, trust in government is essential to consent to the governed. Our system really only works if we trust that the institutions in place are acting on our behalf. Now, this doesn't mean that we should just blindly believe what the government tells us, but it also doesn't mean we should seek probably incorrect information that makes us feel better about the world when it doesn't align, when reality is not aligning with our prior belief systems. And then lastly, and this may be the most important thing, conspiracy theories, especially those grounded in politics, end up promoting this sort of epistemic nihilism, that nothing's true. Right? This is what you see in a lot of authoritarian or quasi-authoritarian states around the world. If you sow misinformation and you sow conspiracy theories, you start to question whether there is any truth at all. Why should we believe anything coming from the government at all, right? And if that's the case, why not? It doesn't matter what system we have. Nothing matters. We could have a democracy, we could have an authoritarian state. It really doesn't matter because nothing else matters in the first place. Also, conspiracy theories, and this isn't up here, but I think it's worth mentioning, they are encouraged through the growth of negative partisanship in the United States. Negative partisanship refers to this idea, and it's always been around, but it's certainly been ramping up over the last few years, that not only do we have political opponents, but we're more interested in seeing the other side lose than we are in actually winning ourselves. So we take greater satisfaction in seeing our political opponents lose than winning ourselves. This is great in sports, right? I'm an Oregon Ducks fan. I can't stand the University of Washington. I'm glad when the University of Washington loses. If Oregon goes 1-11 in college football, but we beat the University of Washington, I'm set. That's fine. Not a great way to run government, though, right? But no, it really isn't. I mean, because you can basically say, it doesn't matter what my side does. It doesn't matter what they do so long as the other side loses. Political scientists often refer to people's evaluations when they go to vote as retrospective. People have tended to vote historically based on past performance. Ronald Reagan encapsulated this back in 1980, right? Remember, what did he famously ask in the debate with Jimmy Carter? You guys remember? What? Yeah. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Famously. Is it easier to go to the store and buy things than it was 4 years ago? Is America respected more than it was 4 years ago? And that's how people have generally made electoral decisions, right? You vote based on past performance. When we vote based on negative partisanship, we toss those performances out the window, and it doesn't matter how our elected officials have performed. And if they start to sense that, that's going to decrease accountability in government even more. It doesn't matter what they do. If they keep getting reelected because they're not the other side, you're going to start seeing more and more blatant disregard for the voters, for policy. People are going to say, well, I can act like a charlatan even more so, because it doesn't matter what I do. I'm still going to get elected because I'm not this other political party. Then finally, and this is speaking to the purpose of today's summit, why are conspiracy theories and misinformation problematic for the church? Well, obviously, it's an additional source of division in our congregations, as if we didn't have enough. Right? There are actual problems that are facing our congregations without inventing them through conspiracy theories. It dilutes authentic truth, too. We're called to be discerning and wise, rejecting falsehoods. When we turn to comforting falsehoods that end up rejecting objective reality, I think it's a problem for us in our spiritual lives, too. It's not healthy. Then there's also the problem if, from an outward-focused perspective, the implications for our witness to a broader skeptical world. I'm not saying all Christians believe conspiracy theories, but if the world is looking for a reason to say, well, okay, Carmen, you tell me that your faith is true and it's important and Jesus physically rose from the dead, that's not supposed to happen. But yet she's also believing in these nutty conspiracy theories. Why would I entertain anything else she has to say? Why is anything else she says valuable? So that is a problem. I think I wrote a piece after the election in 2020 for Christianity Today, basically we need to be better losers, is what I said. And it's not just Christians, it's Americans need to be better losers. We need to be comfortable losing an election from every once in a while, because we are going to lose elections. We historically have lost elections, but we also win elections. Every election, right, is the most important of our lifetime. You never go wrong with saying that during a campaign. This election is the most important of our lifetime. As Christians, I think it's important that we recognize there are implications for elections and political outcomes, right, that affect Christians and affect the justice that we're called to seek for our neighbor. Right? They're important. I'm not saying to be totally hands off when it comes to elections. But we can also, as you were saying earlier, we can have hope too. Losing an election is not the end of the church. The church will continue and persist. The church has survived far greater threats than our supported candidate losing an election. And so I think this is where Christians can really be different from the rest of the world too. We can be confident in where our identity and hope lies. We can be confident saying, rejecting falsehoods, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we know who wins in the end. So I'll ask you to consider these questions as we wrap up. Have conspiracy theories and misinformation found their way into your congregation? If so, how have they done so? If not, why do you think that is? Why is your congregation so special? That didn't mean to sound so condescending. I apologize. Well, I say this as someone who, I wrote a book chapter recently for a volume that's coming out from Erdman's, I think later this year, maybe next year. It's Christianity and Conspiracies, and it's written from a variety of different perspectives: psychological, social science, ministry, etc. And I included this anecdote in the chapter. One Sunday after the election, it was probably early December, I go every morning and set up the church, communion, etc. And one of the elders was there as well, and he, we were just talking, and kind of out of the blue, he's like, "Hey, did you hear what happened in Italy last night?" I said, "No, I haven't really checked the news this morning." He's like, "Yeah, it turns out there was this big power outage out there, and it looks like it's evidence that they were trying to shield some voter databases that had been hacked and stored in Italian defense contractors' offices, and they were trying to wipe them clean, but it looks like we got them back, and it's going to show all this malfeasance about the 2020 election." This guy's an engineer, white-collar job, graduated from my university, he's my age, and otherwise you wouldn't know that this is nutty, Italygate, if you want to know what it was called. And of course it didn't happen, right? But you wouldn't know that this guy was entertaining this stuff, and he just brought it up out of the blue. And so that was why I was saying, if your congregation is so lucky, why? And then lastly, how do you minister to church members who are enraptured by false belief systems? I'm not a pastor, right? I'm a teacher. I'm a college professor. I'm convinced that showing people facts and showing people data isn't going to change people's minds necessarily, right? You can't just show someone, here's why you're wrong. We're not wired to respond that way. And so I'm curious for you guys as ministers and pastors, counselors in your Christian communities, how do you connect with people who are enraptured by these things, as any other struggle that people may be dealing with? I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation this afternoon, and would very much like your questions or clarifications. Thank you.